I think most of us wish we had more self confidence, at least occasionally. So, I'm a clinical psychologist and I've helped people work on this for the last 20 years. And I've had to figure out how to develop my own confidence as a person. When I think back on it all, I think what's most surprising is how much progress I made just by identifying and removing the things that were subtly holding it down. If I hadn't caught it and made those changes, I probably would still be stuck like overthinking every conversation, second guessing my opinions, trying to play it safe, and holding back from living the life that I actually wanted to live. So, here are 7 things that I stopped doing that left me feeling more self confident. Number 1, when I'm in sessions, I'll sometimes ask, what's stopping you from showing people who you really are? One of the most common answers I hear is, I don't think I could defend my opinion if, like, someone challenged me. They're afraid that they're going to lose the debate, so they stay quiet. Some people even ask me to teach them how to win these arguments, but instead I tell them about Aikido, a Japanese martial art that I trained in for a few years when I was in grad school. The most fascinating thing that I found about it was that unlike other fighting styles like karate and Aikido, you don't meet force with force. You step aside, you guide the energy past you. Often the attacker stumbles, right? They're expecting that resistance and then they lose balance when they don't get it. I like to apply this same idea. If somebody wants to argue and demands that I justify my experience or my worldview, when I was younger, I used to fall into these traps thinking that I had to convince people or prove that my position was valid. If they pushed, I would push back. I'd be less likely to speak up again the next time. But that approach led to more conflict, and it also subtly chipped away at my self-confidence. If your position only feels secure when everyone agrees with it or accepts it, then it's not actually very secure. So now I try to be open about who I am and what I think. When someone tries to argue with me, I will smile and say, no thanks. I let them know that if they are genuinely curious to understand my perspective and why it resonates for me in a certain way, I am very happy to share, but if they are just looking to win, then I am going to decline the offer. Here's the thing, you are not required to justify yourself. You don't need permission to have an opinion. And you also don't need to explain why you choose not to debate. When I stopped thinking I had to justify myself, it got a lot easier to share who I am with other people. And I noticed they also tend to engage me with a little more curiosity. Number 2, I started noticing something about myself as I got older. So when I would go on trips with friends or we'd hang out during holidays, the first day I'd be all in. I'd be excited, I'd be enthusiastic, I'd be having a blast. The second day, pretty good, but felt a little drained. By the third day, I was irritable. My nerves would be all jangly and sensitive, and I'd kind of just want to be alone. Afterwards, I would need 3 days with no one around before I really felt like myself again. So I'm very social and I really like people. So I just kind of assumed I was extroverted. And more than that, I grew up in Australia and then I moved to the US for college. Both cultures really reward and promote extroversion. So part of me also tried to kind of force myself to act more like that, right? Lots of late nights and big groups and constant socializing. I even remember in a college psychology class trying to kind of game my answers on a personality test so that it would tell me and the whole class that I was extroverted. I wanted to be extroverted, but over time I realized I actually didn't do well when I overdid it. So I started observing myself more closely. As you know, self-awareness is the biggest game changer in psychology, and I found that I felt best when I mixed periods of deep connection with a lot of solo recharge time. So I love taking walks. I love reading. I only go to the gym with headphones on, and I love doing creative work where I feel like I can get into flow states. It turns out I'm on the introverted side of the scale. I still love people. I just don't want to be around them all the time. And now I also design my social life to fit what works best for me, even to the point of having breakfast hangouts instead of late night parties. I stopped trying to be more extroverted than I am. Knowing and owning who I am has helped me become happier, more self-confident, and allow me to build a life that really fits for me. Number 3, so for years when I was younger, I used to get stuck in my head trying to decode one thing: do they like me or not? I would replay conversations in my head. I'd be hyper-analyzing body language, second-guessing everything, and were they avoiding eye contact because they liked me and they were nervous? Or were they avoiding eye contact because they didn't like me? Sometimes I'd even ask my friends to weigh in. I'd give them the evidence and, it's like we were trying to solve a mystery. All of this kept me very stuck in my head, overthinking and overanalyzing. And without realizing it, I'd actually made their reactions to me responsible for how good I felt about myself. And that really drained my confidence. But then I came across some psychology research that just kind of changed the whole thing for me. So the studies basically said, hey, we are not very good at deciphering whether somebody likes us. Part of it is that some people are just really obvious. Everyone will get them right, but other people, maybe more of us, keep it so hidden that no one can tell. Everyone will get it wrong. Some people are nice to us because they are into us, and other people are nice to us in the same way because they are just nice people. So realizing all this flipped a switch for me. I was putting in all this mental effort and I was never going to figure it out anyway. Like, why bother? So I instead just started focusing on showing who I was and trying to have a good time. Along the way, I discovered a much simpler way to actually tell if someone liked me. I would just ask for investment. Will they talk to you? Will they give you their contact? Will they respond? Will they make plans with you? People who like you will give you their most precious resources, which are time and attention. I stopped trying to figure out if people liked me. When I wasn't scanning every interaction for meaning, I ended up feeling way more grounded and way less self-conscious. Number 4, the first time I met my friend Justin was when I tripped over myself and landed flat on my back in front of a group of strangers. I was totally embarrassed, and looking up, all I could see was some jerk laughing at me. Obviously, that was Justin. I would argue we both made a terrible first impression, but somehow we still ended up becoming really close friends. So you hear all the time, and I hear it from clients about how everything rides on that first impression, that the potential beautiful relationship or a job opportunity or whatever really hinges on just nailing those first few moments. But honestly, I think that mindset does a lot more harm than good. What I find is that having that idea tends to just jack up the performance pressure, and then in turn, it minimizes the chances that you'll actually go talk to anyone. It's too much pressure. If you lower the expectations down to doing basic social skills, you will meet more people. You will feel better while you're doing it. And I would argue things tend to go better. So now I lower the stakes. I am just me. I will try to move somebody from being a stranger to a non-stranger by having a very minimal interaction. If we click, fantastic. Perhaps we'll talk again. If not, that is okay too. I stopped trying to make a great first impression. And if I look back, the best relationships in my life started unremarkably. I wasn't dazzling them, right? Being real allowed the relationships to grow. And I think that's where the real power is. Number 5, I used to get pretty uncomfortable when there was a pause or a silence in a conversation. It almost felt like I was failing, right? I wasn't interesting enough or socially skilled enough. So I would panic briefly, and I would clutch at whatever I could to fill the gap. I would ask a question or throw some random observation at them. Say something, anything, just, let's avoid that awkward silence. But I am who I am. So at some point, I asked myself, what would happen if I deliberately chose not to fill the silence? Exactly how awkward can it get? So I ran an experiment. It went basically like this. I would go up to somebody in a social setting of some kind, and I would introduce myself. They would reciprocate, and then I would just pause. I would let the silence hang. I would make awkward silence-inducing noises. I would keep looking at them and smiling politely, but I would refuse to relieve the tension. And yeah, it got awkward. They would shift a little, look around, but then 90% of the time they would jump in. They'd ask me a question or they would introduce a topic. And I say 90% because the other 10% would politely excuse themselves, probably to go tell someone I was weird, which is true. But here's what I learned. It is not my job to keep the conversation alive. I am not on a solo flight. The other person in the conversation is my co-pilot, and they want it to go well too. They also don't want to crash. Brief silences. Yeah, I've learned they're normal and expected, and topics change about every few minutes in healthy conversations. I've found, additionally, that if we leave a little breathing room in pauses, it gives us space for new thoughts to pop up. And if nothing does, well, conversations are allowed to naturally end. So realizing all of this, I stopped taking sole responsibility for the conversation. This, I will say, lowered a ton of pressure. It left me feeling more free to just kind of exist as myself and to stop working so hard. Number 6. So I've always had some of the traits that are traditionally seen as masculine, being goal-oriented, analytical, or decisive. But I also had others that like don't really fit the cultural script for how a man is supposed to be, like being emotionally sensitive, being very expressive, and naturally agreeable. I'm hardly a strong silent type. So for a long time, I second guessed those parts of myself. I felt a cultural pressure, I guess, to like downplay them or maybe hide them a little bit because I got the message that being a man didn't include a lot of the parts of who I was. I will see this with guys that I work with now. I see them comparing themselves to the cultural script they've been taught and assume that if they don't match that, yeah, they're not good enough or people won't approve of them. But over time, I stepped back and I saw that those traits I was concerned about, they're actually linked to a bunch of positive outcomes in different parts of life, which meant they were actually strengths. So why would I want to cut off half of my power just because these strengths didn't match someone else's idea of how I should be? It didn't make sense to me, which is why I stopped dismissing my non-traditional traits. When I embraced the full range of who I was, I felt more confident. And I also noticed that I started to draw towards me people who appreciated me for exactly my particular combination of qualities. I'm certainly not saying everyone should be just like me with my traits. I'm saying we each have our own mix of strengths, and we're better off when we recognize and appreciate those. Number 7. So I used to hang around with this one guy. I noticed that I always felt bad about myself afterwards, and I did not like how that felt. So I started paying attention, and here's what I noticed. When he talked, he was animated and engaged, and he would like look right at me. But then when it was my turn to talk, he'd like listen, but he would like turn and like look out the window while listening. Since I wasn't getting like the level of acknowledgement that I expected, I would tend to just keep talking, trying to get it, and I would fall into explaining myself more. Or if I'd share something I was into, he'd say, "Yeah, that sounds like something you'd like," with like a smile, or he'd be like, "Oh, that's so funny," with no follow-up and no actual curiosity. So he'd do these things that weren't like openly, overtly rude, but more like dismissive in like a quiet, undermining way. So it turns out there's research showing that these kind of behaviors, like giving less eye contact when someone else is speaking, sometimes called visual dominance ratio, that these are actually subtle power moves, right? So they're ways of someone trying to express dominance, like, oh, he's like too important to fully pay attention to me. So once I saw that clearly, I realized that he did those types of things like all the time to me and to other people. I had plenty of history before with people who treated me like I was less deserving of respect. Over time, I noticed that it chipped away at my self-worth. And you see this in the psychological science. How others see us impacts us. That's why I stopped spending time with people who didn't value me. Since then, I find myself surrounded by people who see the best in me, and it's really improved the way that I see myself. Here is one more bonus one for sticking around. So, being the way that I am, I of course thought of a bunch more of these things that I've stopped in order to improve my self-confidence. If you want the full list, just click on the link in the description. Number 8, growing up, I learned not to rock the boat. If somebody upset you, it was safer just to deal with it quietly internally. Like, don't make a fuss. I got really good at keeping things to myself. And then later, as an adult, I kept using that same survival strategy, but without realizing I was using it. One day, my old friend did something that upset me, so he drank a bottle of alcohol that had been a gift for me. I was annoyed, but I also felt that old survival system kick in. Like, ooh, this is sort of back of my thoughts here. If I bring this up, he'll get defensive, maybe he'll get mad, and then it'll be uncomfortable between us. And like, this could end the friendship. And I valued the friendship, but I had started therapy by this point, and I had just enough self-awareness to recognize that this feared outcome was not guaranteed. So I ran the experiment. I told him how I felt calmly, like no criticism, no aggression, just I felt upset and here's why. And guess what? He didn't get mad, right? He admitted he was wrong. He apologized. He was really, really great. And he actually tried to make it right by buying me a replacement. And it tasted really, really bad. But that didn't matter because more importantly, well, instead of growing further apart, we actually grew closer. My annoyance really dropped away. And then I felt this weight lift because like I had learned something through the experience by giving him a chance to repair. He was able to show me that our relationship was stronger than I had realized. It was strong enough to tolerate and resolve conflict. Since then, I've learned that again and again. Avoiding discussing difficult things doesn't protect closeness, right? It silently erodes it. Like, I used to think conflict would ruin things. Now I know if we handle it well, it can strengthen them. That's why I stopped avoiding the hard conversations. My self confidence grows when I know that I can show up fully, even if it rocks the boat a little bit. A good boat can handle it without capsizing.